Okay.
Everybody can see my flowery bottle.
They can. Everyone can see your flowery bottle. Everyone who's in, which is right now about 17 people.
Okay.
We'll just give it a couple of another minute or so.
I feel I have to comment on this, and that I didn't buy it because I liked flowery bottles. I bought it because it was cheap.
Well, and also probably so you don't lose it, because I know I'm always losing my water bottle.
There's no way I'm losing this. Nobody else wants it.
Yeah. All right, I'll just give it one more minute. It's
Hey, Rick, let me call you back in a little bit, please. No, I haven't seen it, no. Okay, all right, bye.
okay, it is 4:02. So let's get started. We have about 23 or 24 people on the call so far. So
yeah.
Just welcome everybody to the SCORE weekly webinar series. My name's Claire and I'm a SCORE mentor. I'm going to be helping Chris today on this webinar. I'm not an expert on the topic, but I'm going to help him just try and field the questions so we can make sure we try and answer everybody's questions that come in. Just a quick kind of housekeeping thing. We have a Q&A function in Zoom. If you could please pose your questions in the question and answer function and not in the chat function, it would make it much easier for us to make sure we get to everything and we try and answer all your questions. That way we can also see if you guys all have some similar questions, we can kind of moderate them that way as well. So as I said, this is the weekly webinar series for COVID-19 and just monitoring the SBA updates and the funding updates, etc. And I'm going to hand this over to Chris Carlsson now and let him speak on the topic. Thanks everyone for joining.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. Yes, welcome everybody. Today, I wanted to just talk a little bit about the trends, what has happened with the SBA, do a little recap of what we did the last time, and then go in and talk a little bit about the short-term planning of how do we use the money to take maximum advantage of the forgiveness, plus look at what the needs are of the business. And because it's a balancing act, it's not one thing. So if we go in and look at what are the trends a little bit, that's not what I wanted. I wanted this one, yeah. So the trends with PPP, as we know, there was a second round of funding, and there was a lot of companies getting funded this time. 2.2 million loans as of Monday morning were actually approved. They haven't all been funded. Very few of them actually this time being funded, but that's what's been approved, and there's money set aside for them. And that has amounted to $175 billion. Now, this time around, New Jersey was more successful than the first time around in getting money. New Jersey companies got 77,000 loans for $7.5 billion, 96,000 average. We are number 5 in the country in New Jersey in terms of funding. In the first round, we were number 9. An interesting aspect of what has happened with the SBA And they reacted pretty quickly, I think, on that. And that is that they have approved 4,000 brand new lenders for making these loans. And they did that really quickly. Now, the question is, of course, once they make the loan, are they prepared to actually servicing the loans? They have 6 months to set it up, which is probably a good thing because they don't have the infrastructure in place to understand what SBA really wants. But they have 6 months, so they probably get there. Also, a question of the due diligence for forgiveness. Will they be able to have that in place and do that right? Which could be a good and a bad. Also going to talk a little bit about touch on people. I heard people who don't want to take money because they don't think they can use it. So let's do a little recap of what we're talking about for people who haven't really gone through it yet and understand it. So a PPP, Paycheck Protection Program, where you get to borrow very cheaply 2.5 times the average payroll cost for last year or the previous 12 months, but the easiest for everybody is actually last year. That is for the gross payroll, local and state payroll taxes, benefits costs, and health insurance. Then there is a forgiveness aspect of this, that where you can be forgiven the whole loan. And the basis for calculating a forgiveness is, again, for 8-week period. It's 8 weeks now. There was a webinar, a presentation that Marco Rubio had today, I think, this morning, where they were talking about that there is a movement amongst some senators on that committee that they're going to make the 8 weeks a longer period of time. That would be great. It's sorely needed. It's hard to get this done in 8 weeks. So if they can extend this to 13, 14, 15 weeks, that would make life a lot easier for everybody. Right now, it's 8 weeks based on gross payroll. That's the basis, local, state, and payroll taxes, benefits costs, and health costs. That has to add up to 75% of the forgiven. It really works in reverse. You really calculate what your gross payroll is for the 8 weeks, and then that becomes 75% of the forgiven. So then you have another portion, 33% of that amount, or 25% of the total forgiven amount that you can add, and that's rent, mortgage, interest, utilities, those kind of things. I was going to show you something from the American Institute of CPAs. I'm going to jump that and then go to what I see a lot, banging our heads against the wall, trying to understand what we really have to do based on a number of things, of some talks going on what impacts the forgiveness factors other than what we just talked about. There is a fact sheet that doesn't say that it has the weight of the law behind it, but that says that we have to compare our full-time equivalents of the number of employees that we had on 2/5, February 15, to what we have on the average on the 8-week period, but we have until 6/30 to get to that same number. If we don't get there, the forgiveness gets proportionally reduced. I've heard that in several places. There's the fact sheet that says it. It doesn't say that it has the weight of the law. There is another thing that is becoming a talking topic, and that is the certification that the PPP loan was really needed for the company and you to continue to operate. And that is in the 5 May 5th frequently asked questions, and that has a legal weight. But the thing about that is that the examples they give are about publicly traded companies' access to capital. So I don't know how much that's really going to apply to somebody who gets 10, 30, 40, $100,000 loan. I think not much, but I don't know that. I think this applies more to larger companies that they will go in and look at. So now let's go in and talk a little bit about banging the head against the wall. Should we take some questions while we're at it?
Yep. So we have a couple of questions. One is from Phil. He just got approved for his PPP loan. However, his business is closed for the near future. He's Phil, I believe, if it's okay for me to share, he's in the exercise world. So yeah. He's going to hire back his employees when he gets his funds. Do you have any tips on how to ensure his loans are forgiven?
Well, based on what forgiveness is fairly clear. And that is, if we go back here to this. So what becomes forgiveness? You start with a payroll. You have 8 weeks from, if you got your funds on Monday, your clock started Monday, 8 weeks you have. And during this 8 weeks, you add up your payroll and you add up your local and state payroll taxes and the benefit cost and the healthcare cost that you have. That becomes the basis. If that is $10,000, then you can add on $3,333 in addition to that. That is from rent, mortgage, interest, utilities. So that is what is forgiven. Pretty clear cut what it is, provided that you have payroll. If you're a sole proprietor, it's not as clear cut, and we can get into that later. But this is what it is. So it's not really a question of tips on what is forgiven. It's really, is that what you're aiming for, to be completely forgiven? Let's see if we get into more questions like this, and I will then bring in an example. I have kind of the thought process of going through it.
So kind of similar to that, we have somebody got their second round of their PPP, but his or her business is still closed. Mm-hmm. They want to take the loan because they have nothing else, but can they give back the rest of what they don't use?
Yes, they can. And that is how it works. What is not forgiven, it gets to be paid back. And here I have a little slide here at the end. Yes, what's not forgiven, you have to pay back. And there is a 6-month deferral where you don't have to pay anything. There is a 1% interest that is being accrued. And then you start paying back the principal with 1% interest, annual interest over 18 months. So you can prepay without penalty. But yes, that goes back to the people. Some business owners said, no, I don't want to take it because I don't know I can use it. If it's a question of this is the money that's going to make your business possibly survive, then I would say, yeah, I would do it. I would take the money, and then I would keep that and use that for my startup funding when I'm getting started again, knowing that I will have to pay back.
And knowing that at 1%, that's not, it's almost, I don't want to say free money, but it is a low interest rate to have, to take that into consideration.
Yes, that's what I would say. It's cheap money at 1%.
Yeah. And then another question sort of along the same lines is, does the 8-week forgiveness start once the money is deposited?
The day it's deposited.
Okay.
Yes. So with some lenders, you have an ability to decide when you take the money. And there is 10 days, I think, a window. A lot of lenders don't give you the ability. They get the loan, they dump it into your account. Some lenders will tell you that you have 10 days to get this, or we're going to force it because otherwise you lose the guarantee and then you lose the loan. So they have 10 days to give you the money, and they want to do that to get the guarantee from SBA. But if you sit here today and you think, well, I'm not open yet, can I hold off taking the money for a week? Yeah, maybe you do. If you can, if you don't need the money in this week and you're not going to have any business until maybe in 2 weeks, you may want to hold off getting the money.
Okay. And then we have one more question, and then maybe we can bring it back to the presentation once people start to pose their next questions. Is there any new information about the PPP loan being able to be used for guaranteed payments to partners of partnerships?
I have to kind of hesitate a little bit to answer the question, because the question has come up. And is that a appropriate use for this money? The answer is no. So then it really becomes a question of how do you earmark monies? This money, if you do a distribution to partners, which money are you making that distributions off of? It's not stamped saying that it's PPP money, but I wouldn't go and tell SBA I used the money for that, because that is not what the money is intended for. So what I think will happen, or should happen, is that you do that distribution, and then you didn't use that money for forgivable purposes, so you get to pay it back according to what the paybacks are. There are certifications that you do that the loan was really needed, and that you're going to use it for appropriate business purposes, and they did ask you in the application what you were going to use it for. So you have to be a little bit careful, but if you have the money, nobody can tell you what you're spending your own money on.
Great. Do you want to continue with the presentation?
I'm going to bring in, I hope, and I'm going to bring in an Excel sheet. Everybody who loves Excel sheet, you can go on and say hooray now. Here, I'm going to take this as kind of an example of Jimmy the Mover and Joan the Mover. They're brothers and sisters. They have exactly similar companies in the same town, and they do exactly the same business. And but they're going to behave differently with the PPP money. So here what you have, this is their normal business patterns starting in April, and let's say 600,000, 700,000, a million, 900, a million, blah, blah, blah. That's the kind of mover in this size. That's probably just about what they would do. So PPP, the coronavirus hit, the close down hit, and April was a disaster. They both did $100,000 instead of $600,000. And they had been conservative and successful before, so they had money in the bank. And after April, both have $200,000 in the bank. Well, as you can see, with nothing done, they are pretty quickly going to end up in the hole. Here, both of them in August are going to be $475,000 in the hole. Part of this is that they collect all the money. Nothing is COD, and they collect on 30 days. So in May, they obviously only collected 100,000 of the revenues they did in April, etc. So they're severely in the hole here. They're not going to survive unless they have a lot of money to put into the business. Now, they did apply for PPP, and they got $450,000. And Jimmy here is deciding that he's going to spend 100% of forgiven expenses, but 75% of that only is on expenses that he would have anyway. In other words, he brought back labor that the business really didn't need, which means that right now he's going to spend the money on labor that otherwise he wouldn't have in the business. I'm not saying that wrong or anything. We're just making a numerical numbers exercise here. So he gets the $450,000. He spends $225,000 a month in 2 months. He has $168,000 in expenses. Everything is forgiven. So over here, he's not going to pay anything back. But then when you go down and look, what does the cash flow do for him? He's fine in May. He's fine in June. The thing hits the fan again in July and August. And unless he puts in $150,000 to the business, he's not going to survive. He's going to be a negative bank account. Now, that's a little bit different example. His sister, Joan, only spends 75% on forgivable expenses. But they're all forgivable expenses. And so she doesn't add any expenses. She doesn't add $112,000 into forgivable expenses, additional expenses in the business. So yes, she's going to start paying back $112,000 starting in November. So then she goes down here. She looks at her forecast. She's good in May. She's good in June. She's good in July. August, she hits a little bit of snag. $25,000, a lot easier to overcome than $135,000. So she's negative $25,000 in August. So Joan is a smart cookie. She goes and says, okay, I got the money. Maybe I invest in improving my margins here. So she takes $50,000 and she goes here, $10,000 a month, and she invests in some better equipment that pushes her cost of goods sold from 50 to 45%. Now what that does for her business is that in August, she is now positive and not negative. And this is just an example, but it's an example of clear up the thinking. What does the business need? What can I do with the money? Jimmy, her brother, just said, oh, I'm going to spend everything I have on forgivable expenses. And as a result, added expenses to the business. That resulted in him still being fairly heavy negative. Joan took a different approach. I'm not going to add expenses, but I'm going to spend the money, extra money I have, on improving my operation and thereby squeaking by. So I'm saying that as think about what your operation needs. And all right. Think about operation needs and spend the money accordingly. Does this take thinking about what do I think I'm going to have in revenues? How are my expenses? What can I defer, etc.? Yes, it does. And I would say that you have to do that. If you're going to survive, you have to make guesses. Are guesses going to happen? No, they never do. but they're closer than no guesses at all. And we know with no guess, you can't plan anything and understand what you need to do.
And I guess you can adjust your guesses as well. So if you guess at a certain number and as you get closer to that date, you see that it's changed, you can adjust it, right?
Absolutely. And that's really what plans are for, like that. Some people say, well, it's so uncertain that I can't plan. And I would say, no, it works the other way around. And the more uncertain it is, the more you really have to plan so you can understand the exceptions and deal with them. Otherwise, you have all the variables hitting you all the time, and there is nothing that is not in chaos.
A couple more questions?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a question from Marie. Does your average payroll from last year have any consequence on the amount that will be forgiven? Example, last year payroll average was 30,000 per month. Will only 30,000 per month be forgiven a month from the loan?
Indirectly it does, yes, because if you had $30,000 per month last year, and so your loan is now at 2.5 times 30,000, which is $75,000, right? Now, the forgiveness is now going to be maxed at $75,000, of which payroll has to be 75%. So that's where the relationship is between your average payroll last year and the forgiveness this year. So if we go back here to this picture here, here, the basis is the payroll. So if you get $75,000, 75% of that has to be payroll. If that's less, your forgiveness get proportionally decreased.
Okay, great. So just, I see someone has their hand raised. We're not going to be using the hand raise function. So if you could put your question on the Q&A, that would be great. Thank you. Then we have a question. Can you apply for a general loan if not approved yet for PPP?
Can you apply for a general SBA loan? Yeah, you can apply for anything you want to. You obviously have to qualify. If you have the historical financials, you have the collateral to be able to get a loan. Yes, I know several people who are in the process actually of getting SBA loans for buildings and those kind of things. The world is still going on, and the process of getting loans is still going, and there's money out there. What's going to happen with the banks and their willingness to lend money in a couple of weeks, a month, etc., we don't know. But yes, if you can go and get a 5-year loan now at reasonable interests, and that's what you think is the good thing for the business, and be able to ramp up and take advantage of the competition potentially, I would think about that, yeah.
And then we have a question. Are the banks favoring their existing customers in accepting and processing the loan applications?
They definitely did that in round 1, were heavily criticized for it. In round 2, they say no, but I don't believe it. I think that they do. Where you don't see it is in the new entrants that have come in to this space. As I said, there's about 4,000 newly approved SBA lenders. Among those, like Square, PayPal, QuickBooks, Cabbage, those kind of people are now lenders. They are SBA approved lenders. They Those people, though, what I see, I think I hear is PayPal saying that, oh, if you're a PayPal member, we can do this for you. If you're a QuickBook user and you don't have payroll, we can do this for you as a sole proprietor. Cabbage takes anybody. And Square, I think you have to be using Square credit card processing, etc. But there are a lot of these non-bank people out there that are happy to process in. They make, I believe, 0.5% on the loan, and this is all computer driven, very few people looking at anything. And just do the math. If somebody can make $2 billion worth of loans at 0.5%, and they spend 200,000 for or 100,000 for IT to get this done, yeah, they want to do the money.
Especially when it's guaranteed to them by the SBA.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and they want as much as possible forgiven. Remember that when you talk about forgiveness, the lenders want it forgiven, because if they don't get it forgiven, they have to service the loan, and there's an expense with that. If it gets forgiven, you're done. No more expense. That's what the lenders want.
So we have a couple of questions that are similar. So I'll ask this. So if you get the EIDL advance after the PPP, does it affect either? I think that the first portion, the $10,000 of EIDL, could be deducted possibly. I've seen some places say that it could be deducted from the forgiven portion of the PPP. Like most of these things, it's fuzzy at the edges, but that's what I hear. Otherwise, what I understand, and I am close to operations that are getting both, the big EIDL is a 30-day loan with 3.75% interest and with no effect on the PPP. Okay. Now, can an LLC, if they are a Schedule C filer, use payroll forgiveness to pay themselves?
My understanding is yes, that they can. Schedule C set up here is a different animal altogether, but yes. We don't know what question is going to be asked, but I don't see a reason why not, that you couldn't. There are premises around it that you are capped at what is proportional to 1 week out of maximum $100,000 a year. So if you pay yourself $150,000 a year with that weekly or bi-weekly corresponding, you're going to have 50% of that not count towards forgiveness. And the same if you would go and claim Schedule C corresponding dollars for the 8-week period, you won't be able to double dip. Maybe. Again, we go back to this is going to be computer monitored by lenders. A large part of them never done this before, and nobody has experience in all this. If you innocently do both, are you going to catch it? I don't know. You're not supposed to. That's what I'm saying.
Now, and then another question, do we have any plans on talking about the NJ EDA grant and the EIDL? This is from Dulcie. The funds were depleted in April. Is there any information that could be additional funds for those programs? because the PPP will not work for her business?
The EIDL, what I understand of that is that they are not processing any more approvals on that at this time. That could change. The people who are in there are getting messages that they are approved. It's sitting at a loan officer's desk, and they're preparing the paperwork. And you get that in the EIDL. When you set that up, you actually set up an account at SBA. Go in and look at that account and see what they say. They keep those accounts updated. You also get an email, but in many cases, that email actually goes to spam. For the New Jersey, I tried to find out, and for next week, I'm going to do some work on finding out what's really going on there, and also try to find out a little bit more about EIDL.
Okay, great. Thanks. So Dulce, maybe perhaps dial back in next week and we can talk a little bit about the EDA, the New Jersey EDA and the EIDL.
Yeah. Also, to go back to the previous one, that PPP won't work for my business. I would say for most businesses, I don't see how it's very negative to get the bunch of money that you pay back over 2 years with almost no interest, with 1% interest. The worst thing that can happen is that you pay back. So I would kind of think about that again, if that's really the case, that it doesn't work for my business. It may not be forgiven, true, but whatever you get from EIDL or New Jersey isn't going to be forgiven either.
So then we have a question from Suzanne, and I've actually heard this a lot lately. She received her PPP money and then notification that her business has had to close. It's non-essential. She has a childcare center. Mm-hmm. Her staff all had to go on unemployment, and so they're now receiving the extra $600 a week pandemic money on top of their regular unemployment. They don't want to go back on payroll right now, right, but she needs the PPP to pay rent, utilities, health insurance, etc. She's curious what she should do.
I would say that you have to survive. That's number one. And kind of do what you have to do exactly that. And that was the intention of all this. We all trying to survive and actually be a business when all this is over. Mentioned that she didn't have any employees and they didn't want to come back. At the same time, she did have expenses for payroll, health insurance, and those kind of things.
That's right.
And all that counts. All that counts as forgiven. And there again, we talked a little bit about last week about being creative. I would pay myself up till the maximum, and then I would funnel that extra money I didn't need back into the business. Now I'm talking as a business person, not as a legal representative of SBA or an attorney or anything. I'm talking about thinking process. What would I do as a business in that situation? That's kind of how I would think about it. And in terms of forgiveness, there is also some movement in terms of, if I can't hire back my people, then if you go and offer them to come back in writing, you get in writing that they don't want to come back, then you're not going to be penalized for the full-time equivalents, and maybe you might be able to even get that as part of a forgiveness. That's not said yet, but it's plausible. And then I would look at what can I possibly add that would benefit me into forgivable expenses of kind of what I would have as expenses anyway. I can't hear you, Claire. I can't hear you. There you go.
Oh, sorry. I think my headphones died. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah.
So I'm not sure if you got the.
No, I couldn't hear you.
Chris, go ahead and speak. I'm having a technical challenge.
Okay, let me see. I can see questions here. Yes, I can email the slides after presentation. Claire, I can get the email list from you, right? Or I can send the presentation to you. Is it okay to apply for more than one PPP lender? Yes, you can't take two loans, but you can apply to more than one PPP lender, and then you take obviously ones that comes through first.
And I was just to add to that, I was speaking to a lender, and he actually suggested that he's telling his customers apply to more than one lender. Just be honest about it and tell them, but apply to more than one lender if you can.
Yeah, I would say that would be good practice to do, especially this time around where it seems to be that the SBA is trying to manage lenders and funnel more in at that time, more in at that time, or from this lender sizes, etc., which makes it harder for the borrower to try to get in. So yes, definitely. It's the same information. Once you have the information, it's a question of just uploading. It's not more work, really.
And then there was a question, is there money still available for new applications?
Yes.
Okay, so continue making new applications.
Absolutely. And I would also venture to guess that when these $310 billion run out, I think they're going to fill up the till again a little bit more.
Okay. And then we have, I received an EIDL grant. Do I have to have receipts? Is there a time frame where I have to spend it?
No, the grant is a grant. And here I think it's a question of certifying what you're using it for. There is no forgiveness process in here where you have to give anything to anybody to ask for forgiveness. So no, I don't believe so.
Just adding into, somebody's just made a comment as well, just adding into the unusual people that you would think of for applying to credit, for credit with, or for loans with, creditnerds.com is a good resource. And there's a contact there called Eric Counts at Credit Nerds, who is processing SBA loans. I'll put that in the chat for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have from Marie, her company applied for the PPP and was approved. That she's the owner of the company and she doesn't get paid through payroll. The bank didn't include her pay since she gets paid as a distribution, even to the amount of the loan. She thought she was eligible for payment up to 100,000. If so, can she apply for that through another bank?
No, you can only get one PPP loan. What has surfaced is if you have employees and you pay yourself through distributions, i.e. if it's kind of single member LLC, it's a pass through, it goes through Schedule C. You could have my understanding. It could have included that same Schedule C as sole proprietors do to increase that amount of the loan. Is there anything that would say that in this 8-week period of time that you can't pay yourself, put yourself on the payroll? I haven't seen anything. I don't see any reason that you couldn't. So could you change the way for this 8-week period or 10, whatever that you want to do, to pay yourself through payroll instead of distributions? This might be the time to do that. Can't hear you again, so I'm going to read. So, am I understanding correctly that if I have only spent 25% on payroll with a PPP loan, then only 25% of the money spent on the approved bill will be forgiven? So if you have spent 25% of your loan on payroll, then you can add 33% of that payroll as other forgivable expenses. It all starts with payroll. If you don't have any payroll, you don't have any other forgivable expenses. It's all driven out of your payroll.
Can you hear me now, Chris?
Yeah.
Okay. So just back to Marie's question, they did include the Schedule C in the application, but the bank took it out and reduced the loan.
Unfortunate. I don't think that they should have. They would probably argue this point, remembering that nothing of all this except a few things are clear. And I don't know when this was done. This could also have been done before SBA came out and said we have a process for Schedule C and sole proprietors. My understanding now, and I know that sole proprietors and LLC, single member LLCs have been able to get loans based on Schedule C. That would also tell me that, and I know people who did get combination of payroll and Schedule C. So it has been done. Do I think there's any recourse to go back to the bank now? I don't think so. I don't think there is a process for that. It's very clear they're saying you can get one loan. And it's kind of one bite at the apple. So unfortunately, you could try. There's nothing that says that you can't try. Go back to the bank, yell at them, scream at them, kick them, whatever you have to do, and see if they react.
Then there's a question, are there timelines for when forgiveness will happen? Is it right after the loan is spent that it can be applied for?
Nothing to do when the loan is spent. Everything to do when you get when you get the loan. If that happened on this Monday, 2 days ago, that's when the 8 weeks started. When you get the money in the bank, that's when it starts, that day.
Is that the same for forgiveness?
Well, that is for the forgive. That's when
Okay.
everything counts. That's when it start. The 8 weeks start counting that day you get the money, and that's when you start counting for forgiveness.
And do you have to apply for forgiveness? That's a follow-up question. So you do have. So you apply for forgiveness after the 8 weeks of when you receive the money.
Yes. Right now, what I understand of it is that the lenders are the driving force behind it. They are the ones who are going to prove the forgiveness. And also based on that, they can't, if I understand it correctly, they can't sell these loans on the secondary market until they know what the remaining loan is and what's forgiven, because until it's forgiven, they don't know what it is. And they can start the process at 7 weeks after the money was dispersed. How they can start at 7 weeks, I have no idea, because you don't know what it is until after 8 weeks. But yes, the lender is going to have a process where you apply for forgiveness. So it's going to be an application.
Okay. Then can you hear me? Because I got an error message. Sorry, I'm very sorry, everyone. Something seems to be up with my audio. So somebody's heard Lois has heard, and just as a quick time check. So this is supposed to be a 30-minute call, but Chris and I had said before the call, if it was running on with questions, we could stay on for an hour. It's 10 to 5, so we have about 10 more minutes for questions.
Mm-hmm.
So from Lois, she's heard that it might be considered fraud to use any SBA money for new equipment or improvements. Do you know if that's true?
There are two answers to that question. The straight up answer is yes. Now, so here is $50,000 SBA loan that came into your bank, and you already had $50,000 in the bank, and you now spend $10,000 on a piece of machinery that is going to increase your efficiency and drive down your margins. Anybody's going to know what money you actually paid that out of? I don't know any way to actually do that. Some people have said, oh, you should take this PPP money and set it into a separate account, and there you pay everything out of that. I don't know. I think that could be counterproductive. What I think is going to happen is that you're going to say, okay, so in 8 weeks, here's my payroll reports, here's my 940 reports. I spend $40,000 on payroll, and I spend $10,000 on rent, so my forgiveness is $50,000. I think that's what's going to happen. Is somebody going to tell you that, no, oh, wait a minute, you could not have bought the new machine in this 8 weeks? That's kind of nuts. Nobody's going to say that.
Okay, and then another quick question is, if I have a loan number from the bank for a PPP loan, does that mean my loan has been approved?
If you have a loan number, so I'm going to try to think about this a little bit. There goes a process. You first get the number when you first apply. And what that means is that you really have an application number. That number goes with you the whole way. Then what also happens is that if the bank approves of what you're doing, then they submit it to the SBA, goes in with the same loan number, and it's not approved until the bank tells you that SBA has approved it.
Then we have, so the PPP is supposed to pay for rent, utilities, interest on mortgage. To get the loan forgiven for a sole proprietor, if there is a home office, will the home office expenses on the mortgage and utilities be allowable use? But my mailing address is different from my home office when applying for the PPP. Can I use the PPP loan to pay for my own house utilities and mortgage?
Not supposed to. Unless those are actually, there could be an argument made if the Schedule C you used as the basis to get the loan included those expenses. Then there could be an argument made for that. It also will be included in the forgiveness calculation for sole proprietor. Having said that, it's not clear to me what basis the forgiveness calculation will be for sole proprietor with a Schedule C. there's some indication that they're saying it's going to be what correspond to your P&L for the 8 weeks period. Or you convert yourself to payroll for those 8 weeks and make that into the same calculation it is for any company with payroll. It's one of the things that I'm kind of monitoring. I'm trying to figure out what they're actually coming up on, and I'm saying it's gray at this point.
Okay. And then we have from Suzanne, what if I spend all the loan money on payroll and expenses within the 8 weeks approximately? However, I'm not permitted by law to open by June 30th. Therefore, I cannot get back 100% full-time employees. Does that mean there's nothing to forgive?
Well, first, if you are spending your loan money on payroll, you have payroll. You can't spend the money on payroll if you don't have payroll. So if you spend it on payroll, you have payroll. So you're going to be able to say that I averaged 5 people on the payroll per month last year. And here in week 1 through 8, I'm paying 5 people. That to me is sufficient. You had the people, you pay the people. Your business hasn't opened yet, so now on 6/30 you don't have any employees because we've run out of money. I don't see a scenario where they would say that it's not forgiven because you paid it out in payroll. Now, unless you have money, other money to start up your business, I'm not sure from the business perspective is the best way to do it. That's the same thought process in my example before.
And then I think we have time for, we have 2 more questions, and I'm going to lump them together because they're similar, which is, can I use my PPP for storage unit rent if my business is using storage units to store business equipment? And the other one is, can I use my PPP for company car insurance?
The car insurance doesn't qualify for forgiveness. And they say that you should not use the PPP money for car insurance, but who can tell what money you use to pay your car insurance? For sure, it's not forgiven. That's absolutely for sure. Storage rental units, my thought process would be that yes, it would be. It's rent. And for a facility that you use for your business. Provided that you had that storage unit contract in place on February 15th. You can't go out and rent one now. That doesn't count.
And then, okay, so final question is from James. It says, I received the PPP. I still need money for inventory. I applied for an EIDL and I'm hoping to borrow at 3.75 based on a 30-year payback.
Yes. I'm assuming that the question there, can I use the PPP money for inventory?
Yes.
You know, if you would ask the bank or SBA the question, can I use it for inventory? They would probably say no. But then again, it's not forgiven. It's not a forgivable purpose. And who's going to say what money you actually had to buy your inventory? I don't see it. So if buying inventory, knowing that you have to pay the money back, is an essential way for you to do business, I can't speak for anybody else. I would do what I had to do business. Yes, it's not forgivable, but that's what you have to do. And then day one after the 8 weeks, or day one after you open up doing business again, if you don't have inventory, you're not going to do business. You're not going to employ anybody. So I would say you need inventory, buy inventory.
Okay, I think that's all we have time for today, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. And Chris, again, thank you for
My pleasure.
Immense valuable information you give. It's fantastic. Just a reminder to everyone, Chris is going to be here next week. We'll be doing this for the foreseeable future with updates, etc. When you register, you can submit your questions with the registration, and we'll try to get to those ahead of time or at the beginning of the call. So just note that when you do register, if you want to submit questions, you can. And go ahead, Chris.
For next week, I'm going to go in a little bit more, take it from where we were today, kind of what's the impact through August, September type thing, goes into thinking, okay, we're opening up again. Let's now plan for what happens in the next 12 months in all this. Plus, I hope to have more information about what's going on with EIDL and the New Jersey money.
Wonderful. Thank you. So just everybody check our website or our Facebook page for upcoming events and webinars that we have. We have the weekly Wednesday series at 4 p.m. We also have a weekly Friday series at 3 p.m., which is not COVID-19 related, but helpful to keeping your business running and alive both now and post COVID-19. And if anybody is interested in a SCORE mentor, it is free, and you can find those mentors on our local website at monmouthscore.org. So thank you everybody for joining. We appreciate it, and hopefully we'll see you next week. Stay safe.
Thank you.